We have first Ethiopia's ambassador to the United Nations, Berhanu Dinka. Mr. Ambassador, how do you respond to the basic charge in that report that your government is deliberately withholding food from most of the famine victims because they live in the two rebel provinces?
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My reaction to the film that we've just seen is one of indignation, because the whole story is based on hearsay and allegations made by 2 or 3 individuals, namely Dan Connell, Chris Carter, and Mr. Elliott of the British Independent Aid.
All representatives of different independent aid organizations.
Aid organizations who have who are not participating in any manner in the assistance that's being given to Ethiopia. They are not operating in Ethiopia. These people are working some in Britain and in Boston. In the case of Mr. Dan Connell and Chris Carter of Grassroots International, they are not operating in Ethiopia. They have not seen what's going on. They have not been there. And basically, the 3 of them are well known to European audiences, to us, to Ethiopians, and to our neighbors as people who have committed themselves for over a decade now to the cause of the rebellion movement in Ethiopia, in the northern region of Ethiopia.
Let me give you an opportunity to answer the very specific charges. Yes, you heard not only from them, but from your countrymen who were among those refugees who say the government is killing refugees. For example, many of them have been strafed from the air by your Air Force.
Now, as the Ethiopian Commissioner for Relief and Rehabilitation, Mr. Dawit, was saying on this interview, these people who have gone to the Sudan or to other neighboring countries, it's very easy for anybody who wants to put anything into their mouth to quote them. For instance, if you had looked carefully at the film, when these people were asking them who have been bombed among you, or who have been close to Ethiopian shelter but prefer to come over here, without even the thing being interpreted into their language, the people were raising their hands. And in other interviews, it's always interpreted for them.
I think probably
the substance of the issue of those that have been mentioned in the film, whether the Ethiopian government is starving these people intentionally, or bombing them when they run across the border. I will say absolutely no basis in these allegations to the 2 questions.
Is your government delivering food to they said 4 million people who live in Eritrea and Tigray? Is your government delivering food to them?
Yes. The Ethiopian government has been delivering and is delivering food to all that are in Ethiopia. One difficulty sometimes limits its efforts, and that's the availability of food and the availability of transportation. But as far as reaching all Ethiopians that are in need, irrespective of where they are located, the Ethiopian government has been doing that.
So you say that report is totally false?
It's absolutely false, and if you give me enough time, I can tell you why it's false and who are doing this. And just to say, before I finish my sentence, the credible non-governmental organizations, the donor countries in Ethiopia, which are operating in Ethiopia, 39 different NGOs, have seen this film in Addis Ababa last week, and they all denounced it as malicious. And surprised that is made in Canada, apparently, by the Canadian television, because the Canadian ambassador was the foremost denouncer of this film.
We'll come back to you, Mr. Ambassador. Notice to your government that a number of people, in the case of Mr. Morris, he doesn't know how many, Mr. McPherson says 2 million people in those provinces are not getting the food they need.
Food availability and transportation equipment permits us. There is no place that we have not tried to reach and we could not reach. The problem is sometimes we have no food, even in the port. For instance, out of the 50,000 tons the United States government has pledged to us in October, we have not received so far a single ton. And there are pledges.
Well, let's talk about food quantities first, and then we'll go into the other things.
That's what I'm saying.
Let's get the view of these other two gentlemen.
That's what I'm saying.
Does that ring true to you, that the quantity of food is not there?
I can't speak of the specific circumstance that the ambassador just spoke of, but at this moment we have absolute schedules for food to come into Ethiopia between January and April of this year, which will total 490 tons. We know when the vessels are arriving, and they're all scheduled, and we don't have any doubt about it's getting there. There are enormous internal logistical problems after food leaves the port to go to warehouses.
But getting to Ethiopia, there is adequate food getting to Ethiopia.
No.
Mr. McPherson, what is your view of that?
That, in fact, in recent weeks, we've been able to move quite a lot of food into Ethiopia. About 100,000 ton plus a month is necessary, and that is now coming in. Most of our food, in fact, all of our food until just this date, has been going through private voluntary organizations like Catholic Relief and World Vision. In a few days, some food will be going into for distribution by the government.
Now, is it do you agree with the 2 million figure? That there are 2 million people who are not being fed?
I don't believe anybody knows exactly how many they are. The thing is, there are areas that are inaccessible. The areas that
Why are they
inaccessible, I'll give you two reasons. One is inaccessibility because of the topography, which Mr. Morse just referred to, and that we are trying to get by trucks, by donkeys, by airdrop now. We started last Saturday. And the other one, there are some areas on the border between Ethiopia and the Sudan where there are security problems, and there we have been reaching with military convoys. We have given military convoys to non-governmental organizations like World Vision. They can testify to that.
What about Mr. McPherson's point that what is really needed is for your government to give safe passage for food convoys, and that you've been asked and so far you haven't agreed?
Well, I didn't want to take up this matter, but since Mr. McPherson started it, I'll give you an answer to that. This is not a new idea that's just coming on this television screen. Some governments and some organizations, and particularly the Grassroots International People and others, have been trying to let the world buy this kind of idea. It's in a way to give some kind of legitimacy to the rebel groups who are operating and organized from foreign territories, working against us as terrorists, to get some legitimacy for them. The legitimacy that they could not get on the battlefield, that they could not get on political grounds. They want to want to do it through food.
So you're saying no to safe passage for food convoys through areas you control because it would help the rebels? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying, for example, there is Catholic Relief Services, there is the International Committee for the Red Cross, there is a Lutheran World Federation, Catholic Secretariat, and World Vision, who are right now operating in both Eritrea and Tigray. They are operating there, and we are not hindering their activities.
Let me ask Mr.
Now,
McPherson,
they want what we are doing within our own country with these people to make it more legitimate and legalized, some kind of acceptance of the rebellion that was going on against us, instigated by foreign forces.
What is your comment on that, Mr. McPherson?
I think it's important to note that a few months ago, we were very critical, really, of the Ethiopian government generally in terms of how it was handling the drought. In recent months, there has been a substantial additional amount of trucks thrown into the effort by the Ethiopian government, and food began to move. Food is getting to those camps, American food and other food, and children are being fed. I've seen it myself.
But those camps are outside the two rebel provinces.
That's exactly right. The problem that we're facing, and again I would say the worst problem we have in Africa today, is those areas that are in contested control, contested by governments and the dissidents, that 2 million plus perhaps people live in. There's a dispute as to how many, but a substantial number live there, and it is those areas that simply aren't getting the food. We're trying. There's flights going into the Sudan side of the border. There's other work, but we simply aren't getting enough food there, and I'm convinced, and I deeply feel this, and I worked it over many times, I'm convinced that without the ability to move food trucks freely through government-controlled areas, through dissident areas, and so forth, we simply will not save the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who will otherwise die.
Do you agree with this?
I agree with it. I do indeed. And I think that it is achievable. I think we should recognize, although there are a number of camps there that are already being operated under auspices, which is providing food to people. But I would think that if it were possible to do, as Peter said, it would be exceedingly useful to us.
Yeah. Now, why won't the government let them do that?
Well, I'll tell you what we can do. The Ethiopian government has been doing its best and will continue to do its best to provide food, distribute food to these people on its own, and also at the same time to allow the existing international, non-governmental organizations like ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, Lutheran World Federation, Catholic Service, to operate in these areas unhindered. But the kind of food truce or something that you've been hearing in the news media is absolutely unacceptable to us, because there are certain groups who want, as I said earlier, to use this thing for legitimizing their friends,
in other words,
and also for certain governments to put their fingers in our internal affairs. We'll never accept that.
So you're saying that your government is putting obstacles to the operation of some relief agencies in those areas because you fear that they have political motives?
No. I said those who are there, like the International Red Cross, like Catholic Relief Services, Lutheran World Services, who are already there in those provinces, they are operating without hindrance. I'm asking a question: if these people are working without hindrance, if we're trying to reach all these people, why is it that the so-called food truce or something like that necessary? And truce with whom? Which government is fighting us?
Yeah, Mr. McPherson?
Yes, we specifically aren't using the word food truce. We really don't want to get into politics there in Ethiopia. What we're saying is safe passage for food trucks. Safe passage. Everybody allows food trucks to go where they need to go. And I think we want to minimize the interference into the body politic of the country.
And that has not happened.
That has not happened.
And that has not happened.
Well, as I said, these 4 or 5 groups, they're working with trucks, I'm sure. Their trucks are passing. And when Mr. McPherson or anybody says there must be a free passage for trucks, I don't really know what we're talking about, because we already have this free passage for trucks.
Mr. McPherson?
How are these people operating otherwise?
Well, we'd like to see it, and we believe deeply, and I believe the ambassador does as well, that we must feed those millions of people.
Most of the money was siphoned off.
We were using aid money to buy arms, through secondary means. If you come to the Middle East, you can buy arms if you have the money. So we were using some of the money to buy arms.
Aragarwi Berhe says that at the height of the famine, $100 million went through rebel hands, but only 5% went to relieve the desperate hunger. Men like Aragarwi Berhe fell out with their former comrades and now live in exile. But his story is supported by other sources, including a CIA assessment written at the time. The operation was supervised by the rebel leadership, including Meles Zenawi, the man who is today Ethiopia's Prime Minister. His office turned down a request for an interview. Preoccupied by the famine, no one asked how the rebel groups were holding off government offensives. Aid agencies and campaigners like Bob Geldof knew nothing of the diversion of the money. Charities deny that there was systematic misuse of the funds.
I think it's absolutely essential that people do give to disaster relief. There are always accusations that assistance goes into the wrong places, but the way in which we make sure it goes to the right places is that we monitor exactly what is going on.
There is no doubt that the aid donated for the Ethiopian famine saved many lives, but the evidence is that large sums of money also went astray. Martin Plaut, BBC News.